A very good morning to you. My name is Hermann Pretorius, and I'm the IRR Head of Strategic Communications. It is a time of change in South African politics. It has actually been quite a few years of change. And with change comes opportunity. And for quite some time, the IRR's basic assumption has been that you go through eras of change and through perhaps eras of stagnation. And it's really in the change moments when, if you did your job, your due diligence, if you put the arguments out there, your arguments will carry weight in the new chapter that lies ahead. And South Africa is no different in terms of change and the absence of it. Last year, we saw for the first time since 1994, the ANC failed to win an outright majority, and all indications are that another ANC majority, or even another single party majority in South Africa's democracy, would be unlikely in the foreseeable future. This has led to the formation of the GNU and, of course, to a new type of politics and the consideration of some old ideas and some new ideas. An idea as old as the Constitution itself is that the state in South Africa cannot be inefficient if it has to deliver for the people of South Africa. It gets its money from its taxpayers, and it has a moral, ethical, legal, constitutional, social, contractual duty to do something with that money that makes this country a better place. Over the last 20 years, we have seen a number of distortions of that constitutional promise. And we shouldn't miss the weight of that constitutional promise and the history before it, where we saw its absence wreak massive damage across our society. What is this promise? Well, it comes down to value for money. The state has a role to play. The taxpayer has a bill to pay. But what happens next? That is for politicians, for parliament, and for voters ultimately to decide. In this era of change, when the vision of what South Africa can be reconsidered from a pro-growth, pro-liberty, non-racial, cost-effective perspective, the IRR has taken it on ourselves to start publishing alternative laws that we send to the most important chamber of our democratic legislature, the public, because that is where all laws actually start. If we can win the debate, win the vote for making sure that the people are on board for our No More Race Laws bill, our Right to Own bill, our Better Health bill, our Freedom from Poverty bill, real legislative instruments to put in practice what South Africa can be, a pro-growth beacon of prosperity and liberty, well, then the battle has been won, and the tide is turning. I'm glad today for you to join us as we unveil perhaps one of the most exciting bills in this series, written by our fellow and our guest this morning, Gabriel Crouse, the Value for Money Bill, an effort to put into real terms that abstract idea that what the taxpayers pay must go to the state, and from there do something that builds our country. That is what Gabriel is going to talk to us about this morning, his research, this bill, unpacking why value for money means real transformation, pro-growth, and frankly, a delivery for people who have too long been excluded from delivery. Gabriel, over to you. Afterwards, I will chair the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you, Hermann, and greetings. Yeah, value for money is a pretty old-fashioned idea. There's something strange about the fact that we haven't really had value for money procurement, generally speaking, in South Africa since about 2000. There's also something strange about the fact that there isn't really any major party, no party in the GNU, that's for sure, that is pushing for value for money. So this is coming from in a sense, the outside. This is, in a way, a very weird idea. Hey, let's get the best deal possible. Let's get the best bang for buck. It's weird if you try and find that idea in Parliament amongst professional politicians. But I think it's very normal when you look in the South African body politic, if you look at South Africans around the country. Let me give you a brief overview of what we're going to be talking about. The demand for value for money, looking at polling from 2024 and 2025. The demand for value for money, looking at the Zondo report. The demand, looking at the study by the late Professor Stephen Mechero, Harvard Growth Lab, IMF, World Bank, all authorities for the claim that we need value for money. Then we look at what we've got. The triple PFA system, which we've had since 2000. The PPA system, which is a law that was passed, that we fought against, but it was passed. Some amendments were made, still it was passed, and not a good law. It has not been brought into effect. There is legal action against it. We're looking to join that legal action. Then we look at the DA's bill. It's been getting a lot of news. I think it's been congratulated in part for stepping away from race, which is good. We need to step away from race as a basis for picking winners and losers in business contracts. But I think that there's also some criticism that it deserves, that it hasn't been getting. I think people have been overlooking that. We'll touch on that briefly. And then we will look at the bill itself that we have put forward. I think for journalists and members of the public, a lot of the bill is quite technical. So we're not going to read the whole document. It's quite a long document. We will highlight the things in that document that really stand out, that in a very practical way incentivize, require value for money. If this thing was passed as it is, we think in effect you would save South Africa probably 150 billion rand a year. That's on the basis of a report we've already issued. And 150 billion rand, I've got to say, is a very conservative estimate. When we're talking about value for money in public procurement, the government spends about 1.2 trillion rand a year. It's about an eighth of the economy, maybe even higher, maybe more, a seventh. So it's like a day in the week is just government spending. And it's currently highly inefficient. The government itself has said, going back to 2015, and these data have been sort of renewed, that maybe as much as 40% of that spending is misallocated, is effectively wasted due to corruption. So we don't think you can save all that money overnight. We don't believe in making false promises, but we do think that you can reduce that probably by around half, that waste, by just changing the law to maximize value for money. Okay, so I think it's a good idea, but what about other people? Okay, this is the overview again. Sorry. Please be patient with me if I have some slide issues. I'm hopefully a bit better at drafting laws than at managing presentations, but I'll do my best here. So the polling shows that it's not a weird idea to want value for money. In 2024, the Institute introduced this question to its polls where it said, how would you like the government to spend its money? And we gave respondents four options really. The first option is value for money only. And that means, the state wants to get the best bang for its buck for every rand that it spends in public procurement. Then we said, look, option 2 is you get value for money. That's the first priority, unambiguously. If it happens to be the case that 2 or more companies are tied, then you use race as a tiebreaker in favor of Black, Indian, and colored groups. And, so to give a picture of what that would look like, it's like, if the government is buying, some department is buying laptops to put into a school or put into an IT system for administrative purposes in health or home affairs, whatever it is, if there are 2 companies that are selling the same laptops for the same price, and they've got the same reliability, same delivery times, then it's a tie. Then you flip a coin. That's how it works in some jurisdictions. In this version, you would use race as a tiebreaker. And then the third option is, no. You pay extra for BEE premiums. So that means, going back to the laptops, if two companies are selling the same laptops, but one company's got more BEE points, then it can charge more for the same goods and services and still win the contract. And the other company that would have charged less, that one gets nothing. The state doesn't buy from that company. Instead, it spends more to get less in order to promote BEE. And then there's other. So, most people were willing to choose one of those options. We see that value for money only with no race is close to 50% of people. That is the most commonsensical approach, around 48%. There's a bit of a margin of error there. So maybe it's actually at 50, maybe it's more like 45, but it's a big number there. And then you see 22, 23% would like the tiebreaker option. Now, if you combine those numbers, you get, what is that? 50, 60, 70, it's around 70%, it's around 70% of people want value for money. Some with the tiebreaker, some no tiebreaker, but for both of those groups, the first unambiguous priority is value for money. They do not want any extra money being spent for BEE premiums. Only 23.7%, only 24, you could say a quarter, let's be generous, 25% wanted to spend extra on BEE premiums. So, it's roughly 70% want value for money and roughly 25% want BEE premiums. So that's a huge, overwhelming preference for value for money. That's 2024. Okay, what if you just focus in on Black respondents? If you just focus in on Black respondents, the numbers are roughly the same. There is a slight difference. So if we look at value for money only, that comes down from around 47% to around 30%. So that is less of a preference for that. But it is still a pretty strong preference. 30% is around a third. Okay. And then you have 28% wanting to go for value for money and race as a tiebreaker. So that tiebreaker option goes from being, around 20%, maybe 23 to around 28%. And so together, 30 and 28, that's 58, nearly 60%. It's around the amount, it's a strong majority. It's definitely a comfortable majority of Black respondents want value for money only. Sorry, want value for money first. And then, between those two, a sort of a halfway split between those who want value for money only and those who want to keep race as a tiebreaker. Amongst Black respondents, you see 36% prefer BEE premiums. So that the number does climb there. But it's still, hovering around a third. Okay. Then we fast forward to 2025, when the same poll was redone, the same polling question, this time during the budget crisis. So South Africans, for the first time, really in the history of the Rainbow Republic, are confronted with a situation where the budget is not just rubber stamped by Parliament because there's one party that has such extensive control, but instead you've got the DA stepping in and saying, we don't like the idea of increasing VAT. It's a tax that disproportionately falls on the poor. We don't want any taxes to rise. We definitely don't want that tax to rise. And a fight ensues that goes to the homes of all South Africans. Like, wow, democracy is alive. And the fight is about the money in your pocket. Should the government take more money out of your pocket or not? We obviously argued that it shouldn't. And we actually showed a way that you could cut that. But I'll leave that. And putting this bill would allow you to cut that. Okay, but the important change is we see the preference for value for money increases. It was already high, it gets even stronger. So value for money only plus value for money as a tiebreaker goes all the way up to 87%. Only 22% want BEE premiums. So, it's an important increase in preference for value for money as people start seeing these pressures. And then the same, if we just focus in on Black respondents, value for money only climbs up from 30% to 45%. And value for money plus race as a tiebreaker grows also a little bit to 32%. And so together that's 77%. So the overall population is looking at about 80%, and the black population only at around 77% preference for value for money. Again, with that split with race as a tiebreaker. So, okay, so 70%, 77% of people want value for money. That's a huge preference. Only 22% want BE premiums. Okay, then we can look at the Zondo report, which asks this question: is the primary intention of the Constitution to procure goods at the least cost, value for money? And the Zondo report uses the phrase value for money. Or is the procurement system supposed to prioritize transformative potential as identified in section 2172 of the Constitution? The Zondo report recognizes there is an inevitable tension when a single process is simultaneously to achieve different aspirational objectives. And you can think yourself, if you were a procurement official and you are tasked with buying bricks that are going to be used to build a school, classroom, that's already a hard job. What bricks do you want? Yellow bricks, red bricks? One question is maybe you get a cheaper brick, but it's going to crumble. Maybe you get a more expensive brick, but it's not actually better. They're just overcharging you. What about delivery costs? What about reliability of the supply? There's actually a lot that goes into just the decision of what bricks to buy. And if you make the wrong decision and you're buying a lot of bricks, you can waste a lot of money. Now, it'd be crazy if it would be hard. There's an inevitable tension if you've got a further aspirational objective. You don't just want to get the best bricks for your bucks. You also want to get a brick company that is, nice to its neighbors, or plants trees, or has a certain racial profile, or is going to promote a certain political objective or something. If you also have to add that to the mix of your considerations, it's going to be harder to get the best bricks, or laptops, or traffic light controllers, or whatever it is you're specifically tasked to buy. Zondo report recognizes that. And it said, in the view of the Commission, the failure to identify the primary intention, the failure to answer this question, what's the primary intention, value for money or something else, is unhelpful, and it has negative repercussions when this delicate and complex choice has to be made by default by the procuring official. If you leave the procuring official to try and figure this out, value for money or something else, it gets a big problem. That problem is called state capture. And so the State Capture Commission said, ultimately, the primary national interest is best served when the government derives maximum value for money in procurement process, and procurement officials should be so advised. So they were saying, as a corruption-busting measure, maximize value for money. It's not just that maximizing value for money gets you the best bang for your buck in the moment. It's also that it makes it easier to audit. It makes it easier for the police, the NPA, the society in general to peer into the decision-making process and say, this person has been doing their job properly, and this person has been taking advantage of a confusing system to act in a corrupt fashion, as happened over and over again in evidence led before the Commission, which is why it gave this advice. And I'll just conclude by saying, if maximum value for money advice is signed off by the former Chief Justice, I'm convinced it's constitutional. I can get into a separate constitutional analysis of Section 217, but let's take it as granted. Maximizing value for money is constitutional. So 70, 80% of the population want to maximize value for money. The Zondo report wants to maximize value for money, and the Constitution says it's okay, you can do that. Let's look at what happens when you don't maximize value for money. The only sort of official report that looked into government data that extensively surveyed BEE premiums happened in 2010. There was a partial report by the City of Cape Town more recently, but in 2010, that's the last time the government let researchers in to properly look at this stuff. We are filing applications to open the lid again. But what you see here is from one little department in the Northwest, contract, 61% premium, BEE premiums paid. And the premium is the term used by the Mafero study. If 61% in sports and culture, that is, you're spending a lot extra, to buy seats for a stadium, or, I'm talking about a simple stadium out in the countryside, or to buy wheelie bins to allow rubbish to be put away in public parks and so on. You're spending 60% extra compared to what you could have spent because of some further goal, in this case, race. If you had saved that 60%, you could have bought more wheelie bins, or you could have put some of the money to go to bricks for school classrooms that we have a huge shortage of in this country. 40,000 shortage, at least. Could have could have put it to some other use. But 20% premiums were paid in this case, and the demand for value for money is a demand to turn that 20% into 0%. Again, there might be a split within that, like, do you want it to race as a tiebreaker or not? But where the supermajority agrees, take that 20%, turn it to 0%. Let's get value for money. Harvard Growth Lab explains this second order effect quite nicely. All these bullet points are up in front of you, so I'll just read them with you. Hopefully we can stay on the same page here. The Harvard Growth Lab said state capacity has declined due to overloading state bodies with goals beyond their core mandate. They're not saying race here. Their issue is not race. It could be BE, it could be anything else. Your core mandate as a procurement official is to maximize bang for buck in buying a particular product. You get overloaded when someone asks you, don't just maximize value for money, do something else. The crisis, their quote, the crisis in South Africa stems partly from preferential procurement rules that overburden state institutions. Preferential procurement does this overburdening because it distracts from the core mandate of procurement officials. Policymakers wrongly assumed such rules could be applied to complex sectors at little cost. These rules have strained key public organizations. These are all pulled from their long report. Preferential procurement has fueled patronage and corruption. South Africa needs a system that avoids burdening state bodies with extra objectives. Preferential procurement rules should be relaxed, they said, and removing these rules should be a priority, both in cases of crisis, sorry, the word crisis is missing there, and normal operations. Sorry, emergency, both in crises and normal operations. So Harvard Growth Lab demands value for money. It's not just the Zonda report, it's not just the people, it's also the experts at that university driving inclusive growth. Then we look at the IMF, which says that South Africa spends considerably more than comparative countries, but achieves worse outcomes in public procurement. So we spend 1.2 trillion rand a year, we're not getting 1.2 trillion rands worth of stuff for it. The preferential procurement system is costly and ineffective. The system favors established businesses. This is one of the amazing things about our BE premium system, is that it kind of, like all things that deviate from value for money, creates a moat so that now only very well-established companies can afford to do all the paperwork and the deals and whatever to get the BE points to stay competitive in the thing. And as I've put in a previous report, the government's own data shows that the vast majority of procurement spend that is actually tracked in terms of BE that is spent on the private sector goes to majority black-owned businesses. Estimated at around 600 billion rand a year. So important reform aspects worth prioritizing, according to the IMF, are simplification. Value for money is a simplification. You take away the extra goals and you just focus on value for money. The World Bank says South Africa's market lacks dynamism. Same thing. Firm entry and exit are a third of typical middle-income countries. In other words, there are these moats. Companies are, if they've made it, they stay there. New entrants can't come in. Companies, even if they aren't doing a very good job, they don't get replaced. Why? Because of policy interventions like preferential procurement that have become so cumbersome that they smother the implementation capacity of the public administration, especially local officials, and open space for corruption. That puts a drag on things that only big business that is well established can survive. And the first recommendation from the World Bank is to improve the efficiency of public spending through various actions, including a better focus on outcomes. In other words, value for money. Okay, so the public wants value for money, at least 70-80%. Across all races, and particularly we focus there on black respondents because the current system has to do with BEE. Zonda report, world's leading experts, IMF, World Bank, Harvard. Okay, what do we have? We do not have value for money. We have a system where for contracts below 50 million rand, you've got 20 or 20 points for BEE, 80 points for value for money, for price actually, and that creates a 25% premium cap for BEE or other specific goals. So the current law, the Triple PFA passed in 2000, doesn't actually require you to do BEE premiums. You could do other specific goals. When Mandela was president, some of the government, some of the organs of state, and under early Mbeki, did point scoring on the system for companies that would donate money effectively to charity, that would build houses for free for low-income staff and stuff like that. So that option already exists under the current system, which very few people seem to be aware of. But the point is, it does require a points evaluation that allows for deviation from value for money up to 25%. Then you've got, for contracts that are bigger, up to 50 million rand, a 90-10 point system, which creates a cap of 11.1% premiums. And under the current system, exemptions are possible. So any organ of state, any mayor, any municipal head, anyone with a sort of government department that they're running, a minister, if they wanted to, they could apply to the Treasury for an exemption from the BE premiums or the other specific gold premium system in the national interest. It's a key term. And they could rely on the Zondo report to say that maximizing value for money is in the national interest. So in a way, you could get to maximum value for money without changing the law. You could just ask for the exemption. And we have encouraged various organs of state to do that. And it did actually happen a little bit, but then it stopped happening so much. There was a bit of political backpedaling. And so that's why we're saying, let's make it the law that you have to focus on value for money, because really you should have to focus on it. That's what most people want. I've already gone through this. So let's look at the next competing system, which is the DA's bill, which has been getting a lot of news. Again, I want to reiterate, very happy that the DA since 2019 has said they want to end BEE. Since 2020 have talked about social development goals as a thing to replace it. Not as happy as that. We don't want to replace BEE points with other points ourselves. We want to get value for money, like 3/4 of the country. But let's look at the DA system. Their scorecard gives 30% on price and 20% deviating from value for money on social development goals. That means there's a 25% SDG premium cap on the DA system relative to value for money. There's a 25% premium BEE premium cap right now, and they want to make it a 25% SDG premium cap. But because price has come down from 80% in the current system to 30% in their system, price is actually 2.5 times more important under the current ANC system than under the DA's proposed system relative to preferences. The price premium under the DA system is 66%. What are these SDG goals? Well, there's, the DA in its document says that there are, the UN provides the official set of 231 unique indicators. The DA has noted that planting trees can get SDGs, which are 66% as important as price. The cost of this is not really known. No estimate is provided. And we can go back to what Harvard said about the BEE premiums, that when they were brought in, no one bothered to figure out, well, how much is it going to cost in terms of red tape and paperwork? I'm not saying the DA hasn't thought about it at all. They said we'll make a kind of online system and maybe that'll make it cheaper. But you can search through their documents for an actual cost estimate. How much will this red tape cost? And I don't think you'll find it. I've searched, I couldn't find it. Okay, so those are the competing systems that all deviate from value for money. I have to go back a slide here. This shouldn't say triple PFA. This should say PPA. This is the next competing system, which is the incoming law signed by Ramaphosa but not brought into effect, that actually removes the premium cap and instills pre-qualification criteria, set aside subcontract requirements. In other words, if this thing comes into effect, it's even worse than the current system or the DA system, because on the incoming system, you can get a 10,000% premium and it'll be fully legal. Okay, so you've got the three systems there: the DA's, the current system, and the incoming system. None of them focus on value for money. None of them make it the first priority. So how do you make value for money the first priority? Well, you write it in the law unambiguously as the first priority. So the law, as I said, is quite long, but I can just quote this bit of it, the draft bill. This is the requirement. Value for money is the decisive criterion for the award of a contract and must be determined by objective methods that include life cycle costing, including acquisition, operation, maintenance, and disposal, quality and fitness for purpose, delivery and schedule reliability, risk and appropriate allocation, capacity and capability of the bidder, integrity and compliance, including tax compliance, and the absence of fraud, corruption, and collusion. And if you look at like the DA's bill and the good parts of the incoming bill, everyone does this. They all say, the best practice in public procurement legislation around the world has incorporated these kinds of holistic ways of looking at value for money, where, as I was saying with the bricks, life cycle costing, you don't just say, I want the cheapest brick, because then you could buy a brick that crumbles immediately. And if anyone's been into rural South Africa and looked at schools that were built in the last 10 classrooms that were built in the last 10 years, many of them have crumbled. So, you want to get bricks that will last. You want to get laptops that have the right software and so on. So that's part of what makes value for money a real difficult job for a procurement official to get, is that they can't just look at the cheapest thing. They do actually have to look at bang for buck by looking both at cost and at what are you really getting for it. And this is, the law here says, that's what you have to do. And that's all you have to do when you're deciding who's going to win the contract. The National Treasury must set some standards under the bill. This is section 4.3, and tools for assessing value for money in line with global best practice. So you need some regulations to fill in some of the details, partly so that you can change things as you go forward. This is, again, just how it works in jurisdictions that are well run. And it's more or less how it works already in terms of that part of it. The accounting authority or officer must upload written determination of the reasons to the National Treasury's digital repository within 10 working days of the award. So we set up a digital repository, and every time the decision is made, the basis of the decision gets declared. And that allows South Africa's, one of its under-tapped resources, which is the media, and the social media, to be part of this thing. So you can go and look, and you can see if some nonsense reason is given, and you can make that publicly known, and that can add some pressure and trigger investigations. We've got the DA there because but also the ANC in their Public Procurement Act bill, act that hasn't yet come into force, also require digital databases, and the digital databases is doable under the triple PFA, although it hasn't really been done. I think the distinction in the IRR's proposal is that the repository has to be generally publicly accessible. There'll be some information that's redacted. Business secrets can't be given away, but the default will be general accessibility. And that's because we don't just want that information to be sitting in a vault. We want it to be accessible to you, because it's information about how your money's been spent, because as a taxpayer, your money is the money that's being spent here. So you deserve to know why the decision was made to spend it in the way that it was spent. Solicitations, every time there's a tender contract being put out, it must state the evaluation methodology for value for money. The reasons for the award must be published together with the notice of the award. So that concludes that section. This is the sort of simple how to focus on it. Well, you just focus on it. You make it a legal requirement. Then we've got a tie-break preference and categories of preference section, which says, if two or more bids are objectively determined to offer equal maximum value for money, the accounting authority or accounting officer may apply one or more categories of preference listed in subsection 3 solely to break the tie. The categories of preference are employment intensity. So that means if two companies are both selling laptops, the same exact laptop at the same exact price, and they're the same reliability, you can look at employment intensity. The company that employs more people, maybe you give that company a tie-break advantage, so that in some sense you're rewarding companies that employ more people, but not at any cost, because we've already maximized value for money. No one's getting paid anything extra for this. The next one is proven delivery. So that would go over and above reliability, as it's already been included in the determination. So this would be a little bit like, in rugby tournament or soccer tournament, whatever, if at the end of the season, they're the same, two teams are the same on points, then you look at who kicked more drop goals or something like that. You kind of twice in that sense. Proven delivery. Financial soundness is another one. And then we have, and this has been a difficult call, but we've included transitional Black ownership and management as contemplated in subsection 6. And what subsection 6 says is that the transitional period is limited to, I think it's 30 months. And the reason for including this is twofold. The first is some people are worried that if you go to a maximum value for money system, the majority of contracts are currently going to majority Black-owned companies, that suddenly those companies are going to lose all the business, and that'll create social dislocations. And to try and smooth that over, you say, well, okay, BE high-scoring companies can no longer charge a premium, but they can expect a tiebreaker advantage. And if you look at other countries around the world, the US has sort of phased out affirmative action, but en route to phasing it out, it's had premiums, it's kind of phased out to just having a tiebreaker system, and then phase the tiebreaker system out too. So sometimes in a democracy, you go step for step. So this offers the step, but with a very clear window of 30 months, and then it's done. The second reason that this is included is because if you look at preference for value for money with no racial consideration, you had a minority of South Africans supporting that. It was getting close to 50%, but it wasn't a majority yet. But if you include value for money with value for money as a tiebreaker, value for money with race as a tiebreaker, then you get up to 70, 80% of the population, improving it, including 70, 80% of the Black population. So in politics, in a democracy, if you want to pass a bill that's actually going to get the majority support, you look at the polling and you try and give the people what they want. And together, everyone wants value for, most people want value for money. Some people want a tiebreaker. So you put the tiebreaker there for race, but you withdraw it within 30 months because as a temporary measure, it makes sense to withdraw it once those companies are accommodated to the new system. That concludes the presentation. I just want to say thank you for your time. Thank you for consideration. And we hope we get some good questions.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. Much to chew over. Let me start with a few questions in terms of the bill itself. What constitutional gap does the value for money bill aim to close that existing laws like the PPPFA and the signed Public Procurement Act did not close, if I can put it that way?
So section 2171 of the Constitution says that the system must be cost-effective, transparent, and there's a couple of other adjectives, competitive. And the Zondo report summarized the requirement in 2171 as value for money. So must value for money. We have a system on paper, according to Treasury, Acting Procurement Officer Vili Matebula has said this many times in response to questions from me. We do not have a maximum value for money system. Currently, we've got a BE premium system, a BE preference premium system is the way he puts it. So that's, must means must. That's I checked. I looked it up. So that's the gap we're filling. We're doing what we must do. The other part of what we must do is recognize the need to protect or advance persons disadvantaged by discrimination. That's 2172. And the way that we do it primarily is by maximizing value for money. This is something that I think the Zonda report talks to when it says it's in the national interest ultimately to maximize value for money. And we keep, John Endres, the IRR CEO, he keeps going to these examples. Like, let's look at classrooms. You can have less classrooms being built and more BEE points or whatever, or you can maximize value for money. It means more classrooms. You can have less roads being built from the town to the village that has the class, the school. Maybe you build a road that gets halfway there, and you do it with a company that scores points on a BE system or whatever. Or you can build a road that gets all the way there. And which one of those two options is helping persons disadvantaged by past discrimination? In our view, the thing that actually helps people is building the road, is building the school, is getting the job done, fixing the pothole. That's how you get over apartheid. You fix the pothole. In those parts where the legacy kind of still lives on. So both of those parts of the Constitution are addressed directly by this bill. That's the gap we fill.
So the critics of this bill will say that it is an anti-transformation bill. What would be your answer to that accusation?
Well, Herman, I think we'd both say the same thing. It's anti-fake transformation. The current system is transformation the way an alcoholic swapping from gin to whiskey is transformation. Okay. You know what's real transformation? You stop wasting all the money. You stop, beating your partner. You sober up and you do the right thing. That's real transformation. Value for money is sobering up the system that, according to Treasury itself, is probably wasting 40% of 1.2 trillion rand spending every year.
That is sobering indeed. The invoicing and the transparency components of this bill, how does that measure up to the current system? And why go there? Why give that as? Why not just why put that in the law, as it were?
Herman, I'm very glad you asked it. It didn't come through in the presentation. It is in the bill, and it's an important detail, because we don't just want to help the government do better. We want to help businesses do better. So currently, this is how things work. The law sets no limit on how quickly the government has to pay you, the statute itself. But Treasury passed a regulation to say that governments have to pay companies within 30 days of receiving a valid invoice. Now, unfortunately, 30 days is kind of the international norm, because if you're receiving a paper invoice, or if your invoicing system is a paper system, the kinds of delays that can get involved have standardly meant that you sort of crawl ahead at a snail's pace. There's a problem with that. And the problem is, there's a couple of problems. One is the government doesn't always do it, but they have actually started to do it. Since Treasury put the regulation, it did change it, which is a nice indication that things do change. And you can look at their reports showing big shifts in numbers, and you can talk to small businesses that supply the government, and you will hear there was at a time. SARS, after the Nugent Commission, SARS and Treasury kind of figured out about rebating VAT more effectively and quickly and paying out procurement more effectively and quickly. It's asymmetrically important for small businesses. Big businesses do not have cash flow problems. The banks want to give big businesses money. Small businesses suffer cash flow problems. Their overdraft charges are a significant part of their costs. And sometimes you've got staff payroll day coming and you don't have the money to pay your staff. And then what you have to do is you have to not order the next bit of equipment that you want to order. You have to not buy the new bucky or whatever, because you have to pay your staff, because you've done the job, but the government hasn't paid you the money for doing the job. And you can speak, if you talk to people whose business, roadside, people who mow the lawns, people who fill in the potholes, people who have those kinds of small businesses will tell you that this is a very big problem for them. So what we've said is the following. We've looked at international best practice. We've mandated that Treasury must, within 6 months, set up an e-invoicing system. And that once any contract is concluded using the e-invoicing system, the payment has to be made within 5 working days of the valid e-invoice being received. And that's how it already works in Australia, a bunch of other countries. And so we're saying, how do you help small businesses thrive? How do you help them get a bit of a head start? It's by doing the e-invoicing system, and that gets phased in after 6 months, and after a couple of years, it's fully required everywhere. There's a second advantage. It's easier to audit.
Mm. Mm. And I think part of what has been fascinating about BEE is that the label calls it an empowerment policy, but in a real sense, in a practical sense, it's mostly a procurement policy. It doesn't actually filter down to the level of actually removing barriers of economic empowerment. It just, at a relatively high level, operates on the assumption that there will be a trickle-down empowerment if you rig the procurement system in just the right way. What would you say to people who would criticize this bill and say, fine, it looks at procurement, but it in the same way as BE, it fails because it doesn't go critically deeper into removing those socioeconomic barriers?
I would say there is a lesson to be learned from Adam Smith about the division of labor. Once upon a time, it was quite normal for, one person to make the whole thing, whatever the thing is that they're going to make. And then there weren't that many things in the world. Nowadays, to use a famous example, you can take out a pencil, and literally there's not a human on earth that could make one ordinary pencil, because making the paint is so complicated, getting the sort of quote unquote rubber, getting that little metal band that holds the rubber to the paint, getting the graphite in the thing. It is more than you or I could do in our lifetimes. We'd have to cross continents many, many, many times. And yet there are many pencils, and they cost enough that even struggling South Africans can afford a pencil, do the homework, keep the books. So how did that happen? Through division of labor. And the way that division of labor works with procurement is that you have the minister and the director general. You start with Treasury. Treasury's got to think, how much money should we borrow? What should we do about interest, the second order effects on interest rates? Then, okay, this amount of money is going to go to the Department of Education. The Department of Education has to think, are we going to increase spending on teachers, or are we going to increase spending on classrooms? And that is a question that comes, if you really think about it, to what are these real barriers to entry in the economy? Then you percolate down to provinces, to a particular school, and the headmaster of this school has to decide, what are we going to do with this money? Are we going to put a new TV in the staff room? Or are we going to put a new bit of budget for the textbooks that haven't been coming through in the classroom? Those are decisions that speak to the heart of social progress, of transformation, of genuine empowerment in South Africa. Then you hand the job over to the procurement official, and all the procurement official has to worry about is, you've told me what to buy, TV or textbook. I'm going to get the best TV or the best textbook for the amount of money that's allocated to me. And Hermann, you will appreciate this. I think you and I both like this. Have watched this British TV show called Yes Minister. And there's a funny moment where the division of labor in government is addressed, and the official is asked, do you agree with this policy you're implementing? He says, no, the policies are crazy, but they're frightfully well implemented. And in South Africa, the most common complaints I hear on TV, on radio, is, we've got nice policies, but they're badly implemented. Why are they badly implemented? Because the implementer, the public procurement official, has been overburdened, overloaded, overtasked. Let that person just do their job of maximizing value for money. And I think you're going to see a much better sort of uptick in real service delivery coming out of that translation.
And this is, I think, a fascinating part of the conversation that many people aren't actually aware of, is the just the logistics and the admin, the complexity on the procurement administrative side. And before we started the live stream, you mentioned to me that this is one of your criticisms of the DA bill, is it still allows for quite level of sort of bureaucratic difficulty for the person, the procurement officer, who needs to make sure that they are juggling the various plates or spinning the various balls, or whatever that metaphor tortures itself into being.
Yeah, so the DA notes that some studies have suggested that from a company side, the compliance costs are like 10 to 100,000 Rand per company for just filling in BE paperwork when you want to contract with the government. And they say, you know, we hope that it'll be cheaper for the SDG premium system because we will rely more heavily on companies just swearing affidavits. So like one of the things was you can plant trees. You can charge 66% extra for selling laptops if you also go plant trees. So now you're a laptop selling company. You don't get to focus just on being good at selling laptops. You also have to go and learn how do you plant trees. Now, where do you plant the trees? Maybe go plant the trees somewhere in the Eastern Cape near, I don't know. Now the affidavit has to be checked. The DA says, well, we'll do some investigations to check the affidavits, and you don't have to check them all the time. Presumably you can let some of them go. But if you can get such a big extra bonus, if one company is getting 0 on SDG and the other company is getting 5 out of 5, and that means they get 20% weighting and price is only 30% weighting, that gives them a huge incentive to lie. And where there's a big incentive to lie, there's a big requirement on the government to go and check. So the procurement officer, you can either centralize this whole thing so that you've got the Department of Social Development Goal. They get their list of 231 unique indicators. They get their list of how many contracts do you think are concluded in a year with the state. I mean, it's 1.2 trillion Rand. Okay. Now, for each one of those things, you're going to go double check. Did they plant the trees? The costs of that are considerable. They haven't been estimated. And I'll say this, it's like, even an ANC politician, I saw kind of early onset GNU thing in the National Council of Provinces before the 2024 election, when the ANC and the DA, the NCOP is sometimes a bit more serious. They looked at the Public Procurement Bill at the time, and they said, this thing has these set-asides, these pre-qualification criteria on 11 grounds. And Kasatu said 11 grounds, that's already much too complicated. How are the procurement officials going to handle it? And the DA said, yes, and where's your costing of it? And the ANC chairperson, Yusuf Karim, he tongue-lashed Treasury. He said, you guys have said this is not really going to cost anything. We don't have to charge. We don't have to figure out how much it's going to cost. Maybe it'll cost something, but it's so minimal. He's like, be real. I beg of you, be real. And, I would like to say the same to the DA. Like, be real about how much you think this is going to cost. And if you have some data, if you've got some other country that's tried this out, and you can see how much does it cost to check those affidavits, and it comes back, it's 10 Rand. Let's have a conversation about that. But I think if you don't have that cost estimate, it's really worrying, because we have not got enough money. And our public procurement officials, by all accounts, are already overburdened.
I must say, I do welcome the DA's proposal. I think it is a move in the right direction, and perhaps that is the perpetual curse of the policy analyst, is to say step in the right direction, but not arrival yet. And as you describe that system to me now, with the best intentions, if we are going to get real, not only does it add a bureaucratic and administrative burden, but it does inject the risks of gatekeeping, of the underhanded bribe, because someone has to go out and check. If you have to do that sort of homework, the more homework there is to do, the more opportunity there is for someone to say, how about we cut a deal? So you get away from some of the issues of BEE, but the system still seems riggable.
I think that's right. And if I can refer back to the Stephen Mechiro study that I cited earlier, in 2010, Northwest, he's looking at a bunch of departments. And the average, I put those numbers up there, the average BEE premium was 20%. That's a huge part of your budget, you know. Okay. Mejero asked 42 procurement officials. These are real human beings working in those government departments. He asked them, are BEE premiums causing an extra financial burden? And roughly speaking, half of them said yes and half of them said no. If your own accountants can't tell you if the thing is costing extra or not, and it costs 20% extra, then you know that you have a situation that is ripe for corruption. And this is a case of good intentions gone awry. Why do half of them say, no, it's not costing extra? For the same reason that some people looking at the DA's thing will say, no, it doesn't cost extra. It's not really a deviation from value for money. Let's say we're hiring a company to sell us wheelie bins or bricks or laptops, and they have scored their SDG points by they've already built a bridge somewhere in a rural community to help them cross the river. Isn't that adding value for money? We're paying them for that extra thing, but they've actually gone and done it rather than the government doing it. So you can see how someone can have a headspace where they're like, it's not actually extra money because we're paying them to plant trees, and who doesn't love trees? But what it means is you're taking 20% of the budget out of Treasury's control, out of the minister's control, out of democratic control, and you're putting it as like a funny side tax where companies are now going to decide to either do it properly or fake do it through bribery or whatever. And the fact that it's even confusing to talk about, the fact that real procurement officers have been confused by BEE premiums suggests to me that good, sweet auditors in the rural hinterland in the Western Cape and the Northern Cape and the Northwest and wherever, they'll also get confused. Are we paying extra? Are we not paying extra? And where it's confusing, the wolf will come and it will eat everyone's lunch.
Yes, that it's so annoying because I so wanted to be able to endorse the DA's bill but it just becomes impossible. Reading your bill, reading your research, and listening to you now, it is so difficult to not see the wolf in the room alongside the elephant, in the fact that you either have a simple system with competition or a different system with gatekeeping.
Yeah, it's very well put. And I think that this is why, the IMF call for simplification, the World Bank call to focus on just the outcomes right in front of you, the Harvard Growth Lab's warnings against overburdening. This is not the first time, and it's important. Like, none of those guys mention race. In other jurisdictions, there have been big procurement problems. It's not always race that makes the issue. It's always gatekeeping. It's always a deviation from the straightest path between 2 points being aligned. It's like when you make things fuzzy and confusing, you're trying to do too many things at the same time. Around for the room for this kind of opportunity, for corruption, really. And I think, like, if you look at America in the 1880s, before Teddy Roosevelt kind of came in, the Tammany Hall system, it's like, it is kind of, to be fair to South Africans and to be fair to the DA, like, if you're a teenager of a country, this is like a very teenager kind of idea. You know what? When I was a teenager, I would also do this thing. Like, I'm studying for the exams, but I'm also listening to music, and I'm also like kind of positioning myself in a place where hopefully some girls will see me and I can see them. And I'm also like a little bit on the phone, kind of connecting with people. It's like I'm just doing all of the things at the same time. Aren't I marvelous? And then you get a bit older and you're like, wow, no, there is a time to reap and a time to sow. There is a time to focus on maximizing your budget, and then there's a time to think about the big picture stuff and how do you increase your income and so on. I think that as this country matures, the DA matures, hopefully they'll come to see a simpler, better, faster way of delivering change for South Africans. Yeah. Also, by the way, just the last thing on the DA, Hermann. 70 or 80% of people on our polling like value for money. I haven't seen any polling on the UN's 231 social development goals.
That hot topic of dinner table conversation.
Yeah, but it's like if you want to win votes, and if you're not the DA, if you're Action SA or the IFP or the ANC, if you want to outcompete the DA quickly and get a big policy win, be the first party out of the gates to say full-throated, simple, straightforward value for money. That's what I want, and I think the electorate will reward you.
Yeah, I'm going to go to two questions here from the comments. Thank you very much. From Ayanda Zulu. It's a long one, but I'll keep it verbatim. Not to take away from this important intervention that tackles preferential procurement, which has been the lever of BE enforcement in the economy. I'm a bit concerned that the third wave of BE goes beyond government contracts and extends into licensing requirements that limit access to certain sectors of the economy on the basis of compliance. Does the IRR have any thoughts on this dangerous shift?
Yeah, I think that there's a small qualification, which is that after mineral rights in South Africa were de facto nationalized and then turned into a licensing regime, the sector codes in the mining world have effectively said you've got to do some BEE in order to have a license to operate. So in terms of the waves of BEE, I know there's some people who anyway, there's like a policy inside baseball question about how to draw these waves. But I think it is true for sure that we are in the midst of a doubling down on BEE, a much more aggressive form of BEE. If you look at what's happening in the legal sector, if you look what's happening in realtors, property developers, if you look what's happening in health, it's exactly as described, a use of licensing to prevent operations based on BEE. And I think that it's like the same kind of argument applies. Do you think you are improving South Africa's rule of law by shutting some people out of being able to operate because they're not coordinated in the right racial configuration in a company? Do you think you're helping health by taking time out of a nurse and a doctor's day or an administrator's day that could go to curing patients and expanding services, and instead to focus on some kind of racial cookie cutter exercise? I think very few people really do think that the current system is the right way to go. But I think those people who think that way are in charge. And so there's a bit of a democratic disconnect between what most people want and unfortunately the direction we're going in.
Then a last question from Harvey Anderson that I'm going to take a stab at and then throw over to you. And that is, I understand that the IRR is producing documents like this one, which are very informative and factual. My question is, how will you get lawmakers to take note and get these accepted as government policy? In every single webinar I've hosted where we've announced policy or a bill, we've gotten this question. It is a very fair question, and it is the fundamental question that if think tanks can't answer it, then they have no business trying to think they will only tank. So the question is, where do we see influence making a difference? Our late, great, legendary CEO of the Institute, John Kane Berman, always referred to the people of South Africa as one of the countervailing forces that has pushed against South Africa's drift to extremism on either side of the ideological spectrum. And it is in that space where the IRR genuinely seeks to operate. Our tactic, our strategy is simple: language, logic, law. If we can give people the language to talk about the problems in this country, if we can then give them the ability to not only diagnose, but to understand and talk about and popularize and accept prescriptions, then we're into the province of changing logic, the thinking about what should happen. And then we're into the province of lawmaking, rulemaking, power decisions. So when we publish our research, we genuinely try to tick those 3 boxes, to understand that sequence, to go upstream from politics. Because if we're going to be honest, downstream from politics, you don't get to influence, you only get to respond. So why I like Gabriel's bill and why his research on this is so worth reading is it helps me understand the language and the logic of the issue so that I can then advocate in whatever circles I am for change to how people act politically, how they vote, either for parties or for laws in parliament. So my short answer is, how will you get lawmakers to take note? Because we first have to get ordinary people to take note. We have to establish that language of talking about what's really wrong and what would go right. Then we get to logic, then we get to law. Harvey, I hope that's a fair answer. I'm going to give the final word to Gabriel, because as someone who I've respected for quite a while, one of the most fascinating insights, genuinely life-changing insights I've gained from Gabriel is your understanding of the esteem economy, of how societies decide what is good and moral and move. And I wonder if you could perhaps give us some thought on that and link it to Harvey's question.
Yeah, I'll give it a bash. Thank you, Hermann. That's very kind of you to say. One of the things that is important to note, and it's something we've spoken about a lot through the years, and I see Steven Pinker, has now made it the title of his book, which is a New York Times bestseller, Common Knowledge, Common Sense. And there's a whole podcast that's now started in South Africa called Common Sense. Okay. But what's the key idea here? Let's say I know that the right side of the road, you're supposed to drive on the left side of the road. Fine. If I see you coming along in the opposite direction, if I'm not sure whether you're like in the middle, and I don't know if you're supposed to go the other way, I'm going to get nervous. If you're supposed to drive on the left side of the road, but you don't know that I know, you're going to get nervous. I have to know, and I have to know that you know, and I have to know that you know that I know that you know, and I know, and vice versa. And it is a kind of funny, silly thing, but it took until the 20th century for a philosopher, David Lewis, to actually notice the fundamental structure of common knowledge. And his favorite example was like, if you're in Pisa and you're with a friend and you get lost and you've got no way to communicate, how are you going to find your friend? And everyone says, in the middle of the day, that's the time, and at the Leaning Tower, that's the place. You go there, and there your friend will be, because not only do I know that the middle of the day and the Leaning Tower is the obvious place to go, you know that the middle of the day and the Leaning Tower is the obvious place to go. Common knowledge is there, and I know that you know it, and vice versa. So I know that value for money is the right idea. And you know that it's the right idea. And 70, 80% of the population, if you ask them quietly, one-on-one, hey, look, no one's listening. Do you like BE or do you like value for money? They're like, no, value for money, that's the right idea. But most people don't know that everyone else already knows it. We sit in this box where it's like, I can see the king's got no clothes. This thing is useless, what's going on here. But everyone else is acting like it's normal. So I guess they haven't realized. I'll act like it's normal. And then you have a whole country acting like the situation we're in is normal, where 40% of the money is being wasted, where black unemployment has doubled, where children are starving to death in the Eastern Cape, and so on. And we just act like it's normal. What we do here, you and I, and the Institute in general, and I think even beyond the Institute, people who are trying to promote language, law, logic, reasonable civic engagement, what we're trying to do is point at the obvious elephant in the room and say, you're not alone in seeing it. And if you can just figure out that we're all in this together and that we all see the same problem, we all prefer the same solution, we can then action that in a concrete way, partly through our voices, partly through our votes, partly through our circles of influence. And these things do change. Apartheid ended. The ANC's hegemony has been brought down. We saw the VAT, this is about procurement, this is about money. We saw VAT was going up, then it didn't go up. That was a policy change that has made a difference. You can go and calculate in your own pocket how many thousands of rands you've been saved this year because of that fight. And that fight, I think the Institute was instrumental in. It had been fighting about VAT, keeping it down, and about avoiding this thing in the years building up to that, as well as various others. So we keep the fight going, and we hope for bigger wins as the momentum grows.
Yeah, that is a wonderful answer. I can't end on a better note. So I'll let that coda hang and that cadence work. Thank you very much, Gabriel, for your work, for your time. All of our attendees, our audience this morning, we appreciate your time. If you like what we do here at the Institute, please support our work. Go to our website, join the team, What SA Can Be, as we take these principles out there to build that common sense, to build that common knowledge. And a last word of thanks to the Atlas Network, whose recognition of our research and whose funding of this bill and a few other bills really makes it possible for this battle not only to be worth fighting, but genuinely to be winnable. I thank you. God bless.